Welcome to Cinescope, where our goal is not to criticize or to assign ratings, but rather to celebrate the movies we love, exploring story, characters, music, and relevance to the world around us. I'm your host, Chad Hopkins, and joining me today are Gabriel Green and James Hamrick to talk about one of our favorite films, Back to the Future. Again. But first, this is kind of special because you two are sitting in my living room. Welcome.
Yes, this is very nice. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, this is awesome. I got to meet Gabe in person for the first time this week, and now you. This is the first time for a lot of people now.
Yeah, I always love meeting podcasters in person. I've met Mikey Thistle from Real World Theology in person once. I've met Patrick and Aaron from Fuel & Film as well, and now I get to meet you two. So I'm getting lots of podcast love all over the place. It's really great. I'm glad to have you here.
Nice.
How about you reintroduce who you are, what you do, real quick, before we move on and talk about what we're going to do today?
Well, like you said, we're James and Gabriel, and we're from the Underrated Podcast. Although we're taking a break, hopefully just a short break, and we're going to be coming back with a new show to talk about movies in a different way. But we did just record our very last episode over Justice League, so we got one last Underrated for you before our break.
It seems appropriate knowing how you two champion DC films to have your sort of send-off to the Justice League.
Yeah, it wasn't planned that way, but it just worked out really nicely, since our first episode was Man of Steel.
Right. I haven't seen Justice League yet. I'm famously behind on seeing a lot of these seeing a lot of these movies in general. I think I saw Man of Steel in theaters, but I didn't see Batman v Superman until many months even after its home video release, and I loved it.
Oh, nice.
I saw the Ultimate Edition, and that's the only version I've seen so far. I've only seen it the one time, but I liked it a lot. I don't know if I'll go see Justice League in theaters or not. Maybe I'll wait for that extended edition. We'll see.
Probably for the best.
Yeah.
But in any case, the three of us tend to enjoy those movies a little bit more than other people. So, like I said, it's appropriate that Justice League was your send-off before this soft reboot for the show. Well, we're going to do something a little bit different today because, one, we're sitting in the same room. This is a more or less live episode where I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of editing. But James here, our good buddy James, is a little bit behind and hasn't seen Back to the Future. And so I was like, how about you come over and we'll make this the main reason for us to meet up. Aside from meeting each other, we will introduce you to Back to the Future, and we will get live first reaction thoughts from you, and it'll be a great, cool new way to revisit Back to the Future on Cinescope after talking about the original film back in our preview episode before the show officially launched. So that's what we're here to do today.
And just an excuse to watch Back to the Future again.
Right, for Gabriel and I, for sure. And we haven't watched yet. We're going to here in a minute, so we're not going to live commentate the movie or anything, but we thought we'd get James's sort of first thoughts before we watch the movie and what he expects and what expectations he might have. So before I do that, let's just go ahead and go over the stats like we normally do. This movie was released on July 3rd of 1985, was directed by my favorite director, Robert Zemeckis, who also directed hits like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Forrest Gump, Castaway, and The Polar Express. It was written by Zemeckis and Bob Gale, and the music was composed by Alan Silvestri, whose filmography is basically Zemeckis movies, Captain America the First Avenger, The Avengers, the upcoming The Avengers Infinity War, and the second untitled Avengers film coming after that. The movie stars Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, Crispin Glover, and Thomas F. Wilson. So James, you start us off. What have you heard about the movie? What do you expect from the movie? What are your thoughts here?
Well, so I'm really excited to see it just because for a while I just heard, it's one of the really fun movies from the 80s. You know, the 80s just had such a huge catalog of films that I know people who grew up on them and swear by them and love them. But the more I got into film and the more, I looked at different aspects of it and lists of top 10, whatever, the more I started to realize how important the movie it is and how great it is in terms of technical aspects. Like I see it on, best film structure, best usage of time travel in a film, it seems like it was recognized in a lot of different aspects than I thought. I thought, like I said, it was just a good, 80s action fun movie, but the more I looked into it, the more I realized that people really praise this as more than just a fun movie. So I know a lot of what Gabe says before he'll see a classic, there's almost like a hesitation because it just has so much hype it has to live up to. So I'm really hoping it does, but that's the danger of being the last person to the party is that if everyone else loves it and you like it, it seems like you hate it. But I'm definitely very excited. I can't help but have high expectations, but like you, I'm a big fan of Zemeckis. I think he's a great director who brings a really cool vision. And then just to relate it back to DC, he's currently being eyed for the Flash movie, so maybe he'll come over to the DC side for a little bit.
Yeah, I have a little bit of an opinion on him directing Flash, which we can get to at another time. I'm not completely opposed to it, for the record, but I do have some thoughts. But before I reiterate my first experience with Back to the Future, which I've done on the show multiple times before, Gabe, how about you share your first experience?
I don't remember exactly my first view. I didn't see it as a kid. It was around 19 or 20. I remember I absolutely adored it when I first saw it, and I very quickly went through the rest of the series. And it's such an incredibly entertaining movie. But as someone who really loves to dive into film structure, setups and payoffs, it's a film that just keeps giving the deeper you look into it. So yeah, it's been one of those films I champion as a kind of when I want to talk about a perfect film. I really love it.
Well, with that, my first experience, pretty similar to you, Gabe, except I was a lot younger when I first saw it. I was probably 10 years old or so. I think it was on TV, and I started watching probably after it had already started. I didn't start from the very beginning. But it was on. My parents said, "Hey, you probably enjoy this." And I said, "Sure, why not?" So I watched it, and I really, really enjoyed it. And probably for Christmas of that year, I got it, the DVD trilogy. Got it sitting on the shelf right here next to me. The original.
I have that one too.
Widescreen. It's not all that great as far as DVDs go, but I wore it out when I was a kid and watched all the special features and all that kind of stuff. And I've just been super attached since, and got the Blu-rays when they first came out for the 25th anniversary, and I've seen it in theaters multiple times, and I've met Christopher Lloyd, and it's just such an important film and film series to me that when I hear that people like James, who claim to love film, haven't seen it, I have to remedy that. And so here in just a minute or two, we're going to watch, and then we will be back with our thoughts. So, James, are you ready?
Oh, I'm ready.
Okay, well, here we go. We will be back shortly after this break, and we'll share what James thought of the movie. Okay, so we have just finished watching Back to the Future for James's first viewing. The credits did not finish rolling even 5 minutes ago, so this is about as fresh as we can get. So, James, just initial gut reaction. What do you think?
I get it.
Excellent.
Yeah, I don't think we could be friends if you didn't.
Yeah. No, I completely get why it's regarded as like a classic. Something I thought was interesting was it felt like the opening credits kind of knew that this is going to be like a classic. It was building towards something like they were making this with the intention of this is going to be a big deal to the people who love it. The slow build, the way it knows that it's introducing us to characters that are going to stick around for decades. Mm-hmm. Like when Marty finally shows himself as he gets out of like the pile of books on him and takes off the glasses, or Doc Brown comes out of the door. It's like they already know these characters are going to be beloved, and so yeah, I get it now.
80s films had a way of doing that with introductions and the way they would kind of announce their films with all this bombast.
It's super similar to Raiders of the Lost Ark. You see bits and pieces, and then he's revealed. Like the movie knows exactly. Like it's seeing into the future. It's like, okay, well, this is gonna have a reputation, so let's earn it.
It's funny that you say that because this movie spent a long time trying to get made. Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale have been working on this for years, and no studio would pick it up. Disney said it was too raunchy because it's incest, and every other movie studio said it wasn't raunchy enough. And so Spielberg steps in and says, "Hey, you and I, Robert, are friends. Let's make this movie together." And Bob Zemeckis said, "Well, I don't want to make this movie just because I'm friends with Steven Spielberg." And so he goes off and he directs Romancing the Stone with Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner, I believe. And that movie's a smash hit. And so he's proven himself, and then he says, "Okay, now, Steve, you and I can make Back to the Future." Mm-hmm. And so it's funny that you get this air of how it knows it's going to be a classic when they had to fight so hard to get it made in the first place.
Wow, I know nothing almost about the production of the movie. That's interesting.
Well, let's just go through our typical Cinescope category. So, story-wise, what stands out to you? And Gabriel, you're free to join in here as well. Back to normal Cinescope traditional format.
I like that the story was very, very grounded in its characters. In both time periods, it gives its characters a lot of quirks and a lot of personality, and everything about the story. Like, the story itself is interesting, but it's the characters that drive it, and it's their personality flaws and strengths that kind of shape the plot, and the new problems are a result of because of who these people are. So nobody felt filler. Like, everybody feels like their own unique person who serves their own unique function in the plot, and it all works really seamless together to actually shape a story. So yeah, I like that a lot about it.
Yeah, I think that's part of that iconic feeling is that every character gets their special, memorable introduction, and then like all of the jokes are kind of based in character, and they're not just like committee written one-liners. Each one kind of is built off your knowledge of who this person is. So it's definitely very character driven.
I am curious, James, how many of the setups and payoffs, especially from beginning to end, that you caught? Like, did you catch Lone Pine Mall versus Twin Pine Mall?
No, I didn't. I didn't even see that.
Yeah, at the end of the film, of course, it's called Lone Pine Mall because at the beginning, when he first gets to 1955, he runs over a pine tree.
Oh.
Whereas at the beginning of the film, it's Twin Pines Mall because there were two.
I honestly wish like I could just rewatch it right after that, because there was a lot that I caught. I probably caught some of the more obvious ones, like looking at the truck and saying "one day" and the dynamic between a lot of the characters and stuff, and then the clock at the very beginning with the man hanging from the hand. So, but I have a feeling there's probably a lot that I can go back and reappreciate.
Yeah, that's for sure. For me, I've said this before. I love the concept of time travel in general. Now, Back to the Future, as much as I love it, isn't my favorite presentation of time travel. I've always been more of a fan of the Prisoner of Azkaban set timeline, where you can't affect change. Everything that's going to happen has already happened, and your actions resulted in that, no matter what. Like,
it hurts your head a lot less to think about it that way.
Right. But that, almost in a lot of ways, at least in the case of Back to the Future, lends to a less interesting movie. It's fun looking at a movie like this where everything you do has a consequence. So Marty, we hear the story before he time travels, before we even meet Doc, and he hears the story again for the millionth time of how his mother fell in love with his dad after her dad hit him with the car. And then as soon as he gets to 1955, who does her dad hit with the car instead? Marty. And so it's interesting to know how things are supposed to go, and then all of a sudden a wrench is thrown in that because Marty interferes in a way he's not supposed to. I really like, at least in this film, that concept of time travel works really, really well.
Yeah, and it almost it's kind of the punchline to something you didn't even realize was a joke. You know, like, oh, what were you doing bird watching again? And like, I mean, that's kind of a, okay, whatever kind of line the first time through. And now, like, we get the punchline, 20 minutes later. And so we, on rewatch, we're like, oh, it's really funny the way going back, we're kind of answering the questions that we might have at the very beginning. I just think it's super, it's coherent. Like, every line, they know how to pay off.
Yeah, there's hardly a line that doesn't somehow come back later. Just like the opening, the clock tower thing, where it's a complete throwaway. Kind of the comedic gist of that scene is the woman's interrupting him and Jennifer from kissing.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, that comes back to be the main plot point for the rest of the film.
Right, and even little things like the fact that Uncle Joey didn't make bail, and he just didn't make bail. We don't know what he did. We don't know why he's in prison. But then we meet him as an infant, and we find out he doesn't like leaving his cage, his crib. They say that he cries every single time they take him out, so they just leave him in there all the time. So we get explanations and backstories to characters that we don't even technically meet. I mean, Joey's a baby, and then Marty is finding out things about his parents that I think that sometimes we all wonder about our parents. Growing up in a household, spending time with our parents, especially while we live with them at 0 to 18 years of age, we only get the picture of our parents that we see in the home. And Marty gets this opportunity to go back and actually experience what his parents were actually like when they were his age.
You smoked too?
Yeah, you smoked too?
I think she was born a nun.
Exactly. He has this entirely different concept of what his parents are and who they were versus what they were actually like, just because they're his parents. You don't ever picture them in the same scenario as you, but
Except
you got
his
to
dad.
go back.
He was completely the same.
Pretty much. What else as far as story goes?
Well, kind of continuing from what you were saying there, I did like how it had a good positive relationship between he and his parents, and it's only reinforced by going back to where he is able to see who they were beforehand, and it looked like he had obviously a positive relationship beforehand, but now that he knows them better, and then obviously he's kind of changed their future and helped them for the better. To me, I always end up getting a little annoyed because I feel like the whole dysfunctional family thing is overplayed in movies. So to see like a healthy relationship between kids and like a positive, maybe it's not the central message of the whole film, but just a positive portrayal of their family, and like how learning more about them helps you empathize with them more and kind of understanding where they're coming from, as opposed to just like you said, he assumed his mother was born a nun, and to kind of see what she was helps you better understand people when you know where they're coming from.
Well, at the start of the film, Marty has auditioned for this Battle of the Bands and is rejected by the judges that you're just too darn loud. And he has a speech with Jennifer where he says, what if I turned in this audition tape and they rejected me? I don't know if I could handle that. I'm starting to sound like my old man, because that's what he's heard his dad say. And then when he's back in 1955 and he learns that his dad used to be creative, used to write stories, and was very into science fiction, and he doesn't share his stories because he's afraid of rejection. And he says, wow, I identify with that. That's how I feel. Maybe I'm a little bit more similar to my father than I realized. And I think there's a lesson in there as well, where we just don't know sometimes. And until we see somebody in, I don't want to say their natural habitat, but sort of in that gist.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, let's just go ahead and talk characters. What did you think about Michael J. Fox's Marty? He had so much charisma in it. This is actually the second film I've seen him in. The first time I saw him was whenever we watched The Frighteners for Underrated. So I already knew that I liked him. He's the kind of actor that like the screen just loves. Like It's impossible not to put a camera in front of him and for there not to be like some sort of spark. His delivery is great. He's got chemistry with anything that breathes. He's such a likable character, and he's well written to where
even outside of his performance, it's just a solid character who gets a fun arc and I don't know. I can't really picture anyone else who's going to be that inherently fun. With that kind of personality in an actor that young to carry a film like this, I just think he did a great job.
Yeah, and he's not your traditional like suave James Bond kind of main character. He's got kind of a high pitched voice, constantly tripping around and bumbling around. But yeah, as you said, there's something so insanely charismatic and watchable about his screen presence.
Since I've already sort of done this episode with TJ and Joe back in the beginning of Cinescope, I'm free to divulge a little of my Back to the Future knowledge. Michael J. Fox was the original choice for Marty, but he wasn't the original one cast. Eric Stoltz was the original person cast as Marty because Michael J. Fox was too busy filming Family Ties during the days, and so he wasn't available for Back to the Future. They filmed for a couple of weeks with Eric Stoltz. The chemistry with him and Doc in particular just isn't there. Mm-hmm. So after 2-3 weeks of filming, they say, listen, they go to the Family Ties producers and say, listen, we need Michael. And so they ask Michael, they leave it up to him, and so he accepts. And during the day, he's filming Family Ties. During the evenings and early mornings, he's filming Back to the Future. So a lot of this movie was filmed at like 2-3 in the morning. And over weekends, of course, for some of the daytime shots. But it's funny, I've read interviews with Michael J. Fox where he really doesn't remember a lot of the production of this movie because it was just such a whirlwind time of his life where he was filming a sitcom during the day and filming this all night and was getting maybe 2 hours of sleep if he was lucky.
Having been on a film set, just only one film set at a time, I can't imagine at all doing something like that. I mean, one's stressful enough.
Right, but it's truly a testament, like you guys are saying, there's so much charisma and personality in Michael J. Fox inherently that it makes sense that they would almost derail production to get this guy on set because he carries the movie so well.
Yeah. And then, obviously leading into Doc Brown.
Mm-hmm.
That's such a fantastic character. Not even when he's talking, just watching him in the background of seeing the way he reacts to everything is these huge hysterical expressions. He's just so much, again, just so charismatic and likable, and there's such a wonderful, believable friendship between him and Marty. Like when he gets shot and Marty's like, no, you really buy that there's a real connection between them.
Yeah, and to me, that kind of performance, the line between what we got and Cheese, I feel like it so could have easily have been crossed, but it's never done. It's always hilarious. Like you said, half of the humor that comes from Doc is just facial. Mm-hmm. Like it's just the way he reacts to the situation, and he's got such an expressive face. It's all he has to do is open his eyes, and it's hilarious, and you always know what he's thinking, and he's almost inaudibly commentating on every scene he's in. And yet there is a really believable friendship between the two. Even from the beginning, like the opening phone call, it feels like they kind of established a very legitimate dynamic between the two. And then obviously it's cemented by their first scene together and the excitement the two have together, their rapport, everything about it. It feels like we're watching a relationship that's already been established between the two. I thought it was a really solid way to introduce us to the characters.
We don't know, at least within the context of the movies, how these two people met. They've just clearly got a strong friendship, and they've been together in some capacity for a long time. And what I love about the movie is when you consider the fact that Marty has a friendship with Doc in present day, 1985, and also with Doc in 1955, and how his friendship with one strengthens his friendship with the other because they've been through this ordeal together. And I love considering that when watching the film, thinking how Marty strengthens 1955 Doc's resolve to develop this time machine. He says, you've really given me something to shoot for. You've made a difference in my life because you've come here maybe by accident, but you've shown me what I can accomplish when I put my mind to something. And it's like Marty has taken the advice that Doc of 1985 has given him. If you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything. And he goes back to 1955 and just spreads it to everyone. He spreads it to George, and that circles back in 1985 at the end of the film. He spreads it to Doc, and Doc is all of a sudden so much further dedicated to developing this time machine. It's just a cool relationship where like I said, the friendship in one era strengthens the friendship in the other. And as far as Doc specifically and his facial expressions, probably one of my favorite scenes with him in this movie is when Lorraine has followed Marty to Doc's place, and while she is asking him to ask her to the dance, Doc's just sort of giving him eyes in the background, like, is this really happening? And then when Lorraine says, I think that a man should be able to protect the woman he loves, don't you? And Marty and Doc share a look, because she's not wrong. I mean, yeah, that does make sense. A man should be able to do that for the woman he loves. And so they have to go from there to concoct a new plan that bolsters George in Lorraine's eyes. It's just this really funny scene where so much is communicated non-verbally.
Yeah, my favorite is actually previously in that scene when the car bursts into flames and the trash can, a little scream he does.
I actually got a painting that a friend did for me of that face. I think I have it here in my new apartment. I'll have to show you when we finish.
Amazing.
But yeah, I mean, I love... Christopher Lloyd has been my favorite actor for a long time because of this movie. He just adds so much in the way of both comedy and character performance, and then even just genuine heart in those moments where he is telling Marty, "You've made a difference in my life," or when Marty is preparing to say goodbye at the end of the film before he travels back, and Doc won't let him tell him what he knows about his future, and Marty is just trying to hold on. He says, I hope we meet again in the future. I hope you heed my advice from this letter that I've given you. And Marty grabs him by the shoulder and pulls him in for a hug, because it might be the last time he sees him alive, depending on whether he follows his advice from the letter or not. I just love how much heart is present within that friendship.
Yeah, and I think it really does show how good of an actor he is, because I think there may be a temptation to say, well, yeah, the comedy is really there, but it's not a one-note performance at all. He's not just overly expressing at everything and trying to be funny. There are those kind of moments of heart where you get genuine human emotion from him. So it's a fully fledged performance. It's not just funny slapstick wide-eyed humor. It's a full performance that has an actual arc that can be followed.
Now, what about Crispin Glover as George?
To me, he was almost just as entertaining as, if not just as entertaining as, characters like Marty or Doc. Especially as in the opening, as the old man just content to sit in his living room and move his arms all over the place and,
eat bowls of peanut brittle.
and slap at whatever's on TV. He plays that kind of 80s dad so well, especially considering his age. He falls perfectly into that kind of character, without skipping a beat. There's never a moment where I'm like, no, this is just a dude trying to play an old man. I mean, obviously you can, at certain moments you can tell the makeup, but with his body language and his voice and everything, it feels like he just gets lost in his role completely.
Yeah, if I had not known he was, or seen him later in the film, I would have if I'd watched that movie, I would have never second guessed his performance as 50-year-old. But yeah, he's just so wonderful at being pathetic, but still weirdly likable, even though he's such a sad character.
Speaking of the peanut brittle, there's a deleted scene where after Biff has left, after getting the car towed to the house, a guy from work or an acquaintance shows up with his daughter selling peanut brittle for her Girl Scout troop or whatever the equivalent is. And George is essentially bullied by this girl's father into buying a whole bunch of peanut brittle. And so that's why the very next cut is him taking a box of peanut brittle and pouring it into a bowl at the dinner table.
So still works. But
it works, right? I mean, either way, it's pathetic, but knowing the backstory behind that and knowing that he was bullied into having his own insurance pay for a wreck that Biff caused probably because of drinking while driving, and then getting bullied into buying peanut brittle. Of all things, bullied into buying peanut brittle. It just shows so much about his character so early on. And in that beginning scene in 1985, when it's a family that loves each other and they're still with each other, but there is a little bit of dysfunctionality there, I think, as well. I mean, Lorraine is drinking straight vodka over ice, and she seems to show at least a little bit of regret that this is the direction her life has gone. And you can see the way she looks at George as he cackles at Jackie Gleason on the TV, that maybe she took a wrong turn or two in life, but there's still something there. She's telling the story of how they met and how he looked like a little lost puppy, and she fell for him, and she's maybe just questioning whether that's still there. But I love the way that George and Lorraine interact first at that beginning scene, and then as we go back to 1955, we learn that there really was almost no association between the two of them at all, because they were from completely different social circles.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like that the movie does make that kind of as a statement that early on, the potential for them to be happier together was always there. All it took was, the kind of encouragement that he needed, and then obviously this movie goes the time travel route to get him that encouragement, but you see that kind of positive effect, and it does kind of promote that much more healthy kind of marriage, and I like that the movie gives us that happy ending, where everything kind of works out and we're in a better place than we were even at the beginning.
And I like that they didn't go to some unbelievable extreme with living in a mansion, driving around Lamborghinis or something. They're still the same place, but they're obviously just happier people. And he's just published his first book, and he goes to show like they are in a spot they could have realistically gotten to if he just been more self confident and not continually made the choice to allow Biff to run over him, and just how that one action of standing up to Biff at that one moment broke this cycle that led to obviously is a much better life.
One of my favorite George scenes is in the cafe when he's gone to ask Lorraine to the dance before the skateboard chase. And he's trying to read these scribbled notes that he got from Marty off of his notebook. And he says, "My destiny has popped me to you." And then he says, "And I am your density." I actually have a shirt that says, "I am your density" upstairs. But it's just, he's so quirky. And I mean, from what I gather, Crispin Glover in general is a pretty quirky guy. But he just brings something so unique to a character like George that I don't know. Just like with Michael J. Fox's Marty, I can't really picture another person in the role.
Yeah.
Now, what about Leah Thompson as Lorraine? What did you think of Lorraine?
To me, she spends most of the movie just kind of fawning over him, but she does it in such like this doe-eyed kind of young teenage infatuation.
I think she calls him a dream probably 3 or 4 times.
And it's, like I said, early before we even watched the movie, it was always weird to say that I hadn't seen it just because my older siblings had seen it and grew up on it, and I had seen some scenes here or there, and I know so many of the lines like that one, and so it felt like I had seen it, but now I get why these are the quoted lines. Like I understand why they're so iconic because of the repetition, and that's kind of what you associate with her character. But no, I really, really liked her in the role.
I think the biggest thing that we learned from Lorraine is how different she was as a teenager from the image she told of herself as an adult. Or I never sat in a parked car with a boy or chased a boy or called a boy. And then literally in 1955, we see her do all those things. And she even says, "I'm almost 18 years old. It's not like I've never sat in a parked car with a boy before. Come on." And she's drinking and she's smoking and she's doing all these things that you don't expect from this attractive, pretty girl like her. Although we do see what she became after a lifetime spent with George.
That'll do that to you.
Yeah, no kidding. Anything else to say about Lorraine?
Well, I don't know about her particularly, but I just love like the weird chemistry she has with Michael J. Fox, just how horrifically awkward she makes him. Just how he's just how terrifying and on edge he is throughout all their scenes together, and just how kind of blissfully unaware she is, just as she keeps coming after him.
I mean, you can understand why Disney would pass on a movie like this, because as fun and innocent in a lot of ways it still is kind of a little bit of incest, unknowing for sure, but it's there a little bit. Now Biff as a villain. Biff is probably our last big talking point character. What else? What do you have to say about him?
So I actually had seen a lot of his scenes, and I kind of knew everything, like everywhere his character was going to go. But it's way more enjoyable to see it in the context of the movie, and it feels like they designed him to be like the stereotypical villain of the 80s, or maybe less the stereotypical and more of like the kind of almost quintessential villain of this kind of movie, where, I mean, he's almost every aspect of him is exaggerated. Like even his height, he's bigger than the second biggest guy, or obviously he's bigger. He's going to be the biggest guy in whatever room he's in, and every kind of aspect there is in a bully is bumped up to 11 here, and but just the repetition of lines from him, calling everybody butthead, and like it's he may be the most kind of like archetypal kind of character, I guess, in terms of he's there to be the bully.
Mm-hmm.
But I forget the actor's name.
Thomas F. Wilson.
He's clearly having so much fun in the role, and he just fits in this kind of movie so well. Like he's the perfect bully for both eras. Mm-hmm. So yeah, his whole character feels very at home in this kind of movie, and it also works just because of how much blissful joy he brings to being this big, oversized bully.
I think Thomas F. Wilson at the end of the film as the alternate 1985 Biff in the tracksuit and the car waxing, I think that's more typical of a Thomas F. Wilson role. So to see him in such a threatening position as the bigger, tougher version of Biff, I mean, I've played villains before back when I used to act. It's a fun thing to do, to exaggerate a part of yourself that you don't show very often. And I think that he's silly enough as a villain. Things like make like a tree and get out of here. I mean, that's silly, but I think he's also a believable threat within the context of the movie as well. Like when he takes Marty out of the car at the dance and goes in there with Lorraine and basically starts assaulting her. I mean, you really feel the danger that she's in at the moment and the importance of George stepping in and interfering and rescuing her. So I like that he is a little archetypal, he is a little silly, but he also poses a believable threat.
Yeah, that scene is incredibly dark. I mean, like, I don't think you would get that in this kind of film these days. And yet, just having, as you said, that he is a believable threat. He's legitimately scary, but I think that extra amount of threat at that moment is what it takes to get when George finally knocks him out. It makes that moment so much more exhilarating to watch. And I mean, just as the series goes on, he continues playing different variations. I really get impressed by him as an actor. But I think, yeah, as you said, the way he can play, whether it's Biff being an idiot and we're laughing at him, or being a legitimate physical threat, or in the end just being a total goofball, he plays through all of those really well.
And he's always Biff. It's always like Biff as a bully or Biff as a loser. Like right. He's not playing different characters. He's playing the exact same character, where his life to take a different route. And so for him to be always tapped into who Biff is as this person, I think it just makes for a much more cohesive character than it could have been. It's just, he looks the same, but he's completely different. Whereas, no, this is the same guy. It's just his life is in a completely different position.
Right, and another sort of backstory to what he says in the beginning of the film when he says, "Say hi to your mom for me." We go back to 1985 and we see how infatuated he was with Lorraine, and we see that there was competition between him and George beyond just Biff being the bully and George being the victim. they both were sort of fawning after the same girl, though Biff had technically a lot more of a chance with Lorraine than George did, just because of his stature, his personality, his go-getterness. Even though Lorraine didn't seem to be interested at all.
Can't imagine why.
No, of course not. But you would expect Lorraine to maybe fall for more of a guy like Biff than for George. But circumstances, hitting George with the car, that kind of stuff, that changes things. But I like that they have this sort of added level of rivalry between Biff and George.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else to say about any characters?
Well, actually, speaking of that rivalry, I like how there seems to be some sort of sense of history. The first time we meet him, he's telling me, "I thought I told you never to come in here again." And the whole film's like that. It feels like we're stepping into a story, the friendship between Marty and Doc. This is just, I always love when you step into a film that feels like it's going to keep going after we leave. It's just, I don't know, it makes the world so much more believable.
Yeah, as I said, we get that same sense in both eras. At the very beginning of the film in 1985, and then we stepping into it in 1955, we're always stepping into a story that's already started. And I think that's one of the signs of a good movie is it's like it's crafted this huge picture, and they're like, okay, we're only going to film this. But this all exists outside of it. And they never feel like they're having to cram in the stuff that's not on film into it. Like, no, anybody with the brain is going to be able to pick up on this world as it evolves. But we're not going to slow our story down. We're going to tell our story, and this is where it starts. And so, yeah, every character dynamic, even the town, that's one of the things I remember thinking, after the great opening credits and the awesome Huey, Lewis and the News song, it's by the end of that, I feel like I already kind of understand a lot about this town. From little things like the guy running for mayor, Save the Clock Tower, going by the people doing yoga and waving at them, like this is a fully living town that was existing before the cameras were rolling and will continue to exist. So yeah, everything from his relationship with Doc to the town and Biff, and it all feels like this, we're kind of just getting a snapshot of a living, breathing place.
Because you mentioned the town, I just thought I'd mention this. The town square sequences were filmed on a backlot at Universal Studios in California. And they filmed the 1955 scenes first because it's a lot easier to dirty up a place than it is to clean it up. So they filmed the 1955 clean cut, everything looks pristine scenes first. And then they go back and they dirty everything up, add the graffiti, add a little bit of wear and tear to the world. In the case of the clock tower, at the end of the film, you notice that after Doc stumbled on the ledge in 1955, the clock tower remained broken in the future in 1985 at the end of the film, as opposed to the beginning of the film. But they do that, and then they film the 1985 scene. So I think it's interesting to know the sequence of filming things might not be what you expect, although it makes perfect sense because of production ease.
Which makes the chemistry, the building chemistry between the cast members so much more impressive. That they can maintain and build off of it in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he's so convincingly telling us that he's seeing this as it's brand new, and he's looking at his dad in a brand new light, as if this has kind of already happened. But that I am always impressed the more I learn about just in a film, it's almost impossible to shoot a film chronologically. So yeah, to have that very cohesive way of interaction from start to finish is impressive.
Now, let's go ahead and move on to the music by Alan Silvestri. Now, after the credits were rolling, you were still whistling the main theme, so I take it you like it.
Yeah, this is another thing where it's just being, aware of pop culture and, in kind of very movie-focused groups and very minded towards stuff like that. Obviously, I already knew the theme. Like, if you had played it even before this movie, I'd be like, oh, that's Back to the Future.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, it, like almost every other aspect of this movie, I kind of already knew. It means so much more within the context. And by itself, it's exciting, but when you pair it with, a car chase or a skateboard chase or whatever, you know why it's iconic, because it earned it. It's not just a great theme, it's a great theme that really helped the movie, and it's like the audible version of what we feel, where it's just exciting. And so, yeah, like almost every other aspect, it feels like it was composed knowing where it was going to be remembered, like that it would take a place among so many other iconic themes.
Yeah, I really don't know what I could add to
that. This score in this movie came at a time when everything was sort of overtaken by 80s synth pop kind of stuff. I mean, there were certainly composers out there still composing very traditional orchestral film scores. I mean, John Williams, just the year before, the few years previous, had been scoring both Indiana Jones and Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Alan Silvestri had sort of been one of those composers scoring films with a little bit more of an electronic sound. But they very much went for a more orchestral sound for Back to the Future on purpose. They wanted this sort of return, this giant sense of scale brought to a film that you can't really accomplish the same way with electronic music as you can with just a full orchestra. And so I think having a full orchestra adds to the adventure side of the film more than an electronic score would add to like the sci-fi elements of the film, which I think was the right call. Having the first time we hear orchestral music is the DeLorean reveal. In fact, I think that's the track title of the soundtrack, is DeLorean Reveal, when Doc backs it out and opens the door and pops out. And then we get the build into the actual time travel. And then there's all these little moments when it first takes off and Einstein has become the world's first time traveler. We get this almost like silly, whimsical music as Doc celebrates. And there's so much character that I don't know if you could accomplish the same way with a synthesizer as you can with like a clarinet, for example, in that theme. Or later when you have the French horns coming in and playing the more morose kind of theme as Marty is writing the letter to Doc in Lou's Cafe, telling him about how he's going to get shot to death. There's just so much, I feel like I'm saying this word a lot, there's so much character that is added to the film through the score and helps to tell the story and the emotion of the story that much better.
Yeah, and maybe having a synthesizer soundtrack instantly dates your film.
that too.
And even though this film is so quintessentially 80s, there is a timeless quality about it, and I think that score goes a long way to helping that out.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of a score that has to work across 2 decades, or actually, I guess. Oh yeah, with the 50s and the 80s, and so you want that like musical cohesion and continuity, and so using the synthesizers and then using the synthesizers and then trying to film that 50s stuff and maintaining that kind of theme, there's just a disconnect there. And like what Gabe said, this movie has a timeless quality, and I just feel like the orchestral sound is timeless. You know, we've heard it for decades and decades in film, and I don't think it's ever going away. And so by doing that, by just composing a very catchy and exciting and adventurous theme and playing with the full orchestra, you can kind of use it wherever you want, and it's going to work. And so every scene in whatever era we're in here, it's always exciting, and it always carries the exact same kind of connotation of adventure and excitement, whether we're in the 50s or 80s.
Yeah, and while the score is orchestral, they can still use like the power of love to perfectly ground us in the 80s.
Mm-hmm. I just love that the score has like one main theme that epitomizes all of the action that takes place in the film, whether it's Marty escaping the Libyans in the Twin Pines Mall parking lot, or whether it's him escaping Biff on the skateboard through Town Square, or whether it's him finally making the trip back to 1985 and Doc falling off the clock tower or ziplining off the clock tower to last minute join the cables together and save the day. The same theme is used for all those situations, and it works. It doesn't need to have the concept of like leitmotif that John Williams often uses in his scores, where each character has a theme or each place has a theme or an idea. Those certainly have their places, but in Back to the Future, Silvestri did such a good job of just composing one iconic theme, and then throughout there is different themes that, like I said, like the French horn theme that I mentioned, that sort of represents almost the friendship between Doc and Marty, or the whimsical clarinet that is almost like the comic relief score as Doc is celebrating his success, or various other points we heard in the movie. I just think that Silvestri did a great job of not not making it minimal. It's not a minimalistic score, but it's also not overly dense.
Mm-hmm.
And the theme never outstays its welcome either. When you hear it, it's because something exciting is happening.
Mm-hmm.
So every time you hear it in the film, you almost want to hum along just because it's, you know that means something important within this film is happening. They're not, I guess, vain in how they use it. It's just, no, we saved this, and when the scene calls for it, we're going to use it because it's awesome.
Right, it's a victory theme, and we want to cheer every time we hear it. Now, to sort of wrap up, going into our takeaways, what, just on first viewing, do you take away from the movie?
Well, I feel like I've kind of had an easier time answering this question just because I've known to a certain extent, what to look for. Were I watching this without the reputation it has, there's probably a lot of stuff I would have missed, but going into it, knowing how praised its structure is and how smartly written it is, and that everything, all of the setups and then payoffs, they feel so real and they all work. There's not really one I can think of that feels like, okay, that was a bit forced. We set that up in a real cheeky way in the 50s, and now it all works really well. So watching it with that in mind, I could watch and see, like, I'm noticing this moment and I know it's going to come back, and then I see it come back, and so yeah, just how well it was, how well crafted it was. I wonder, was there like a lot of storyboarding here? Or not storyboarding, but it feels like this had to have gone through so many drafts, just because every single moment, because it's so good that you were telling us, with stuff with George that was cut, him kind of being bullied into that. We know of great stuff that would work that was cut. That means that whatever is here because it's absolutely essential to the story that Zemeckis wanted to tell. And so I'm sure rewatching it now, I can watch every scene and like every action beat, every nod, every line, everything is serving a purpose here because even some good stuff had to be cut.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that earlier drafts of the script had the time machine as a refrigerator, and they had to harness the explosion of an actual nuclear bomb in order to time travel. And I'm insistent that Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is referencing that version of the script when they nuke the fridge. I swear that's got to be true because Spielberg directed that one. I swear by it. And I think originally Doc was supposed to have some sort of like chimp companion, and the movie was at one time wanted to be called The Spaceman from Pluto or something like that. Like they went through a lot of drafts. You're right in pointing that out, and it's all for the film's betterment, because what came out at the end and what we see on the film in the final draft is a tight script, not a second of wasted time from any character or any scrap of dialogue. Everything is furthering something or referencing something that happened before. It's just a labor of love between the two Bobs, Zemeckis and Gale, and it's clear that they put a lot of years' work into this to create the final product that is so celebrated today.
Yeah, and as a wannabe filmmaker, it's so inspiring just to look at, because you can see all the work and love that went into it. And then when you watch a film and it's not satisfying, you can look and see where this film went that extra mile to add that extra setup and payoff, that little character moment, and just where everything comes together to when he finally goes back in time and it's silent, and then Doc Brown starts dancing in the street. You're just grinning from ear to ear because everything has so beautifully led up to this. I love how Zemeckis stages action, and especially in that last sequence, just how he adds just threats upon threats, like where the tree falls down and knocks down the wire, then the car won't start, then he drops the wire and his pants are tearing and he's falling down. It's just all these things on top of each other. I've seen this movie 5 or 6 times, and I was still on the edge of my seat on this viewing because he just builds these sequences so beautifully.
It really is an exercise in building tension, and you can learn a lot from just watching that final clock tower sequence alone, in how each event that happens is heightening the tension further and further and further. And then when all of it is released all at once, or at least one at a time, Marty's own conflicts with the DeLorean not starting, and then Doc's conflicts with the cables not being connected, they sort of resolve themselves all at once, and it adds to an even more satisfying conclusion.
Yeah, it seems like something that annoys me with a lot of movies is where they'll make it at just the last second. Most of the time, it just feels cheap because I'm like, oh, of course we're gonna make it. But here, even knowing that this is a film like an '80s movie that everybody knows, and I've known the ending without seeing it, I still kind of found myself like, oh, like wiping my brow just as it passes the power line, because they were threats. In a lot of other movies, it's a timer. And the only thing that we're worried about is, can they run fast enough? But here, like you said, it's the tree. And then once we think we got the power line fixed, now the other end of the cable is like, there's always something. And so even as Marty's, gunning it and he's about to hit it, we should be thinking, oh no, is he going to make it to 88 miles an hour? Is he going to get it fast enough? Of course he is. But here it's like, no, whether he does it or not, we still got Doc on the sideline. Like, even first-time viewers, I think we all kind of know he's going to make it, but that's just a testament to how well-crafted, because we know it, but we're still, on the edge of our seat. So this is one of those moments, and I'm always impressed when I see him, where it is that kind of last millisecond victory, and instead of kind of rolling my eyes, I'm wiping my brow, like, oh man, that was, that was a really well-staged climax.
Did this win anything for editing, do you know?
Editing, I'm not entirely sure.
That climax is a masterpiece of editing.
Let me double check real quick. While I'm looking this up, is there anything story-wise that you take away as far as like lessons or relevance or anything like that? There's a couple of really on-the-nose ones, but what else do you take away from just the story itself?
As far as the story itself, I'm not really sure. I may be able to gather more on rewatches, but as far as the story goes, it's mainly just, I'm here and I need to get back here because, I've got a life back there. And so a lot of the messages come from, the characters and their arcs. And so I think we've talked about a lot of them, just the idea of being able to empathize more, and the idea of fighting for what you want in a healthy way, and fighting for others and things like that. And I know you were on we were on your show for Lord of the Rings, and one of the central themes, if not the central theme of all those films, is just friendship and loyalty and things like that. And so I always do like it in films when we just get positive friendships and positive family dynamics, and it's the movie presents that as a good thing. So to see the concern, like the real heartbreaking concern that Marty has for Doc, and likewise with Doc and Marty, or Doc towards Marty, there is a sense of friendship, and it promotes that kind of positivity. So as far as just messages I got from the story, I'm not really sure what I'll point to, but with the characters, I feel like every character, as fun as they are also saying something, even if it's on the nose. It's a good thing to be on the nose about. It's good to be very straightforward with things that are positive like that. So I really like that it focused on all those kind of aspects of this friendship.
Yeah, a couple things that stood out to me is just the how crippling the fear of failure can be, and where you see just when you're afraid to take a step out there, how that just kind of held back George's life for the whole time, and just standing up for yourself. But what that really stuck out to me, I guess with all the current allegations, the scene with Biff and Lorraine in the car just kind of was, I guess, that much more disturbing, with all the just the allegations that are coming out, just the importance of standing up for others if you're ever in a situation like that.
I think that's a pretty key one that I don't know if I've always picked up on super strongly, but Marty even though he knows that he has to do certain things to bring his parents back together, there are times when he can't help but act in a way that is going to draw more attention to himself than to the two of them. Like when he sees Biff borderline molesting his mother in the school cafeteria, and he goes and he pulls her away, he says, "Take your meat hooks off," and then he realizes that Biff is 2 feet taller than him, and he has to sort of back off and straighten his collar. But that's an instance where he stands up for his mother, even though he's talking to George at the time. And then there's later when George is going to, or has started to talk to Lorraine and is about to ask her to the dance in the cafe, and Biff shows up and is about to try and steal money from George and perhaps beat him up. And Marty is like, well, here I go again. I have to step in because it's the right thing to do. Whether this is the right thing to do as far as my future is concerned, or whether it's just the right thing to do in the moment, he goes with the right thing to do in the moment and trips Biff, and ensues this giant skateboard chase that is a lot of fun. But in both of those instances, I mean, his job during this week of time is to get his parents back together, or he's going to cease to exist. But there are times when he's forced to act in opposition to that goal because of decency. And
I was just going to say, just to go back to the scene in the car, I completely understand why scenes like that gave, Disney cause to kind of back away from it. But I think that it really works for the film because you can judge the importance or the weight a film gives certain behavior by the importance of the resolution. And the resolution of stopping that was, a lifetime of a healthy marriage, so I feel like a safer movie or a safer version of this movie would have had that moment be more like what was going on in the cafeteria, where, it's still wrong. He's still forcing himself upon her, but it's more of just, a very public area kind of, all you're saying is that, hey, knock it off. And they kind of have to, just because there's eyes watching. And then to say, because of that, then they fell in love. But to go as dark as they did, kind of, it rewards the character for stopping a crime like that heinous. And so the movie gives it weight because he's not just, that's the nice guy who kept Biff's hands off me in the cafeteria. It's like, no, that's the guy who saved me from the car incident. Like, that was a very important moment. And so I think the heaviness of that scene is rewarded. It makes the film stronger because, initially their relationship was, the whole beginning of their relationship was circumstance. She felt sorry for him. Whereas now they have a legitimate reason for being together, and their affection, at least, his affection for her, is on full display. So giving that scene importance makes their happy life in the future almost a little bit more believable because that what he did had weight, and she saw it.
Right, that makes sense. That their marriage, eventual marriage, comes out of a place of actual relationship building rather than one just feeling sorry for the other. And the movie, of course, does say a lot about self-confidence and believing in yourself. If you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything. And the big example of that is the fact that George and Lorraine, and by extension their kids' lives, change so much from the beginning of the film to the end of the film because George has basically created a whole new life for himself where he's not letting people walk over him, and he's showing his affection to his wife because he has affection for his wife. And again, their relationship wasn't born out of one feeling sorry for each other. So being self-confident, putting faith in your own abilities, but also trusting and loving each other results in a better life. And so I think that's the other bigger takeaway for me from the film.
Yeah.
Are there any other final thoughts or things we haven't said or things you want to sum up about your first experience, James, before we close off?
I guess just a summary of it is, what I said at the very beginning is I understand now. I understand the love that people have. This is more than just a fun 80s movie. We have a laundry list of fun 80s movies, but this cemented its place in cinema because it's not just a fun story that's nostalgic for those who, watched it at the time. It's taught in film school because it's beyond all of the great things it has, like, character and heart and positive messages. He's able to back it up with the technical aspect. Whether it was nominated or won, it earned and should have at least been nominated for, editing, just because of how tight the script is, how efficient the scene to scenes transitions are. Like, everything is pushing the story forward. Even in the most lighthearted, fun moments, they're able to evoke a sense of urgency. Like, as much fun as we're having, we know what the scene needs to accomplish, and so we're always kind of gleefully at the edge of our seat for almost the entire film's runtime. So it's got the fun and heart and humor of all of the 80s classics, but it's just such a well-executed film that it puts itself above so many others.
Well, James, I'm so glad that your first experience was such a positive one. I did look up the Academy Awards it was nominated for. It won for Best Sound Effects Editing, and were nominated for Best Original Screenplay, Best Original Song for The Power of Love, and then also for Best Sound Mixing.
That is good.
Yeah, it is an Academy Award-winning film for sound effects editing, which definitely makes sense when you consider all of the DeLorean sound effects, the time travel sound effects, the skateboarding scene sound effects, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the DeLorean sounds are all iconic now.
Yeah, they are. I mean, you could just play a soundbite of the DeLorean driving or speeding up or revving up its flux capacitor, and so many people would be able to recognize it.
As it's fluxing.
Yeah, as it's fluxing. Well, I think that wraps up the end of the episode. That's the end of the official 67th episode of Cinescope. I'm so glad that the three of us are able to meet up and do this together. It's always fun to meet up with other podcasters and to do stuff like this in person.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, this week has been especially awesome just because not only are we able to record here live, but our last episode was only a few days ago, and our last one was the only one we've recorded live. So I'm finally able to put, even though I've seen profile pictures and spoken over Skype, I can now physically put the face to the voice, and it was great being able to do this live.
Well, James, you and I don't live too far from each other. Even though Gabriel has to go back home later tonight, maybe that we can watch the next two in the trilogy sometime soon.
I would love that. That's how effective this movie was. When it was over, I was like, well, I've got to see what they're doing in the future now.
Yeah,
great.
And beyond just being a great film, this whole trilogy is a lesson in how to make a film series.
Oh, I love the next two films in this series, especially the third one almost as much as this one. So you're in for a treat when we do that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Now, contact for the show, you can find us at facebook.com/Cinescope Podcast and at Cinescope Pod on Twitter. Please consider going to iTunes, rating, reviewing, subscribing. You can also do that on the Apple Podcast app on your iOS device. And if you have feedback or ideas, you can email me at thecinescopepodcast@gmail.com. You can also use that link or that email address to contact me regarding co-hosting if you have a movie that you love that you think you can talk about. Now, the two of you, where can people find you online? Whoever wants to go first.
Well, we have a podcast called Underrated, and we in a day or two our Justice League review will be up. But normally we just talk about films that we think weren't received well enough. And we, as we said, we actually will be kind of rebooting the show. So after the Justice League episode, it'll be about a month, and then we'll come back as a show called Franchise Fatigue, which we will be talking about film series. So be looking out for that. And you can find that at underratedpodcast.com and on Facebook as Underrated Podcast and Twitter as underrated_pod.
Yeah, this may find its way onto that new series as we look across the three movies.
Definitely.
Yeah, he pretty much that's as far as what we do podcasting. That's where a lot of it is. I also write for a site called Article Asylum. You can go to our website at articleasylum.wordpress.com. It's primarily a DC fan site, but we try to address things from just general pop culture. So I'm currently in anticipation towards The Last Jedi, writing a series where I rank and review all of the Star Wars films. So that's currently what I'm writing. So between underrated and that's pretty much where you can find me.
Okay, and the best place to find me is at Chadadada on Twitter. That is ChadAdADA. Also, Facebook.com/Chad.Hopkins, and then my other podcast, An American Workplace, where we talk about The Office every week. Recorded a new episode of that earlier today. You can find that where podcasts can be found and at workplacepodcast.com. All show notes and contact information for this show can be found at thecinescopepodcast.com. And that is all for this week. Thank you, Gabriel and James, for this special edition of the Cinescope Podcast and returning to talk about my favorite movie.
Thanks for having us. This was a blast.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for reaching out. It was awesome to make good use of all three of our time here in Texas.
Yes, sir. And thank you, everyone, for listening to episode 67. I'm Chad Hopkins. This was Cinescope, and we'll be back next week with episode 68. Have fun and celebrate movies.